Tsukimoto's brand of cinema has become synonymous with experimentation. His work has elevated, provoked, and questioned the very form utilised by his art. Films like Tetsuo, Bullet Ballet, and Tokyo Fist all tackle characters in a unique way, a way in which the city, the body, and the medium itself becomes questioned and scrutinised. From his early cyberpunk work to his reimagining of the samurai genre, Tsukimoto has always tried to accomplish something unique with the stories he has told. When assessing his filmography, one film seems to stand out, because thematically and stylistically, it differs from the expected directorial norm audiences have come to expect from Tsukimoto. At first glance, one would easily assume it to be the product of compromise. However, it could actually be his most experimental film to date. Hi, my name's Rob and welcome to the channel where we explore the wonders of East Asian cinema. Today, Hiruko the Goblin. Just a quick note guys before we continue with the video, if you like anything I do here then please follow me on Twitter, Letterboxd, subscribe and share the video around and do all those nice things. Keep up to date with my latest videos and what I'm working on at the moment, it really helps a lot. Anyway, on with the video guys. When we think of Tsukimoto, we think of underground independent cinema, films that have no artistic compromise. In many ways, Tsukimoto is the definition of an auteur. He is always the definitive creative voice for his films. He often does more than one role, from writing to directing, editing and acting. When you see a Tsukimoto film, you are seeing something he envisioned. His films often deal with themes of identity and the human existence in urban environments, and he often presents fantastical scenes in a form of chaotic realism. Hiroku, however, is not about fringed characters existing in a metropolis concrete jungle. It lacks a frantic direction and aggressive editing style. You could say that it is a more normal film. A rather presumptuous term, I know, but in terms of formal presentation, and compared with Tsukimoto's established cinematic language, yes, Hiruko does feel more normal. It conforms to more standardised notions of cinematic rules. It's executed in a safer style than Tetsuo or Tokyo Fist, for example, and for this reason, it feels like an abnormality in his filmography. It feels the product of a studio-produced film, but is that really the case? So what's the film all about? The film centres around a teacher and a pupil that go missing as they discover a tomb beneath their school. The teacher's son and his brother-in-law try to unravel the mystery of the school as the narrative unfolds into a deranged fantasy. The film is based on a combination of mangas by Murahoshi, who is probably most known for the Yokai Hunter series. The film feels drastically different to anything Tsukimoto has ever done. As aforementioned, it feels more normal and less radical. This makes it feel like there had to be some compromise stylistically, as it feels so different to his expected aesthetic. Ultimately, it feels like Tsukimoto was trying to please a studio, as most directors tend to lose an element of their edginess when they begin to work with studios. Furthermore, Tsukimoto never really returns to a studio work like this again, so you simply draw the conclusion that this was indeed a situation of pleasing a studio over one's artistic intent. I'm not saying that Tsukimoto's style disappears, there's still an element of him present and shots that resemble the style we know, but it feels diluted. That's what I assumed anyway, and I feel most of the fans of his work came to this conclusion upon seeing this film as well, but ultimately, we were wrong. After I watched the film for the first time, I wanted definitive proof that this was indeed the reason for Hiroku's style, so I turned to the best source on Tsukimoto's work available, the book by Tom Mes, Iron Man: The Cinema of Shinya Tsukamoto. I've read this book so many times and I urge any fans of Tsukimoto's work to find a copy and give it a read, but I've never read the chapter on Hiruko because I'd never seen the film at this point. Until recently, obviously. Anyway, I sat down and I discovered the history of Tsukimoto's experience with Hiruko, and well, I was shocked to find out that Hiruko is less of an anomaly than you might think. The chapter reveals that Hiruko is actually very similar to Tsukimoto's early shorts. You see, before the adventures of Genju Kozo, Tsukimoto's childhood was dominated by making Super 8 films, some of which were even feature length. Now, none of these films are available to watch, not that I know of anyway, so knowing what they are like is almost impossible. We know a few things about them, like how they are mostly monster movies, just as Hiruko is. And Tsukimoto always wanted to make monster movies. In the chapter it has an interview with Tsukimoto, and in it he states, "I find it funny to hear that people say Hiruko is not a typical Tsukimoto film, because the plot and the atmosphere are so close to my 8mm work. If you look at everything I made up to and including Hiruko, then Tetsuo is the exception, not Hiruko." The chapter also reveals that Tsukimoto had a lot of creative control in the film, and the only shot he had to compromise for was the final sequence, but that was more of a financial limitation than a creative difference. He did feel some nerves working with such a big budget and an experienced crew, but creatively he was still in control. Hiruko is ultimately Tsukimoto returning to his roots then, creating a film that resembled what he had always wanted to do. It was a monster film, and that's what he always imagined himself to be, a monster filmmaker. He further states, "I figured that this was an opportunity to try something entirely different. If it was my own money I would never have shot it in the way that I did, but now I had the opportunity to try something else." This is interesting because we see something like Tetsuo as experimental because it pushed the boundary of cinema at the time. Hiroku, which is filled with clear Western influences like The Thing, Alien and Evil Dead, seems more normal to us, to use that term again. However, Tsukimoto sees Hiroku as the experimental film. In many ways I think this is because the aesthetic of Tetsuo was actually a logical step for Tsukimoto at the time. It wasn't really a risk or a drastic change for him. He knew from his theatre work and the adventures of Genju Kozo, which won the PIA Film Festival, which was a really big turning point for him at the time, that the aesthetic of Tetsuo would find an audience, because it was the logical evolution to his current work. My point here is that we think of Tetsuo as a hugely experimental film, and don't get me wrong, it was, especially to audiences, as we had never really seen anything like that. However, for Tsukimoto it was the natural progression to the work he'd been doing over the past 10 years. Hiroku, however, was returning to something in his earlier artistic development, something he had never really tried with a big budget, crew and a huge team at his disposal. He didn't know if it would work, it was a risk for his early brand of cinema. And for that reason, it was an artistic experiment on his behalf. He was testing the water. And sadly it was a failed experiment in terms of commercial success and audience reception, further proving that Tsukimoto's brand of kinetic cinema that he had begun developing was the right aesthetic for him to find success. Hiroku flopped and Tsukimoto never returned to that style of filmmaking again. Thus, Hiruko isn't the most experimental film Tsukimoto has made in terms of the medium. It doesn't push formal boundaries like Tetsuo does. But for him as an artist, it was very experimental, and is easily the most experimental thing he's done with his cinema. All of the other films have been logical steps in the growth of him as an artist, but Hiroku was him drastically changing his style, trying something else. The film is him seeing if the style he developed as a child could work, and therefore, in some ways it's both a farewell and love letter to his early days of filmmaking, and a more pure and honest Tsukimoto style of cinema. For that reason, Hiroku is an essential piece of Tsukimoto's filmography, and a must-watch for any fans of his work, and I urge people to go back and rewatch this film and enjoy it for what it is. Thanks for watching guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please follow some of the links down below to follow me on Twitter and Letterboxd to keep up to date with my videos and help share them around and tell people if you enjoy them. Please like, comment and subscribe, it really does help, it helps a lot. And leave a comment, tell me what you think about this film, or maybe your favourite Tsukimoto film in general. Anyway guys, thanks for watching.